The American Civil War was caused by the two distinct societies of the North and South trying to prosper under one seemingly inflexible political and economic system. Just as the South sought independence from the North, the mountaineers of Western Virginia attempted to establish their ideal agrarian state through separation from Eastern Virginia. Due to their geographic isolation among the Allegheny Mountains and the western Appalachian mountain chain, communication links with the East proved difficult. This formed distinct cultural, economic, and political gaps between Eastern and Western Virginia. The Allegheny Mountains came under the dominion of Virginia after the Battle of Point Pleasant in 1774, when the Shawnee Indians were driven west of the Ohio River. From this point on, mountaineer settlement began, forming a new society. The Scotch-Irish from western Pennsylvania migrated through Harper's Ferry, settling the best lands beside the Shenandoah, James, and Roanoke rivers. The typical mountain pioneer was a yeoman farmer of a shrewd, sensible, and industrious nature. He was always attentive to business while leading a frugal lifestyle. Everything, including his clothes, came from his farm. He hardly ever left his home except to go to church or the local store for news from Richmond and occasionally to gossip with other farmers. His children received an education in an old field schoolhouse from a stern Scotch teacher who stressed reading, writing, and arithmetic. Since the colonial period, Eastern Virginian society revolved around the plantation system. Numerous rivers divided the area, but travel and communication was common between plantations. However, each plantation had its own separate world. There was always enough food, and they had a leisurely daily routine with little work. Some men studied, while others hunted game. Eastern education was primarily received through tutoring and stressed scholarly readings and little arithmetic. Transportation in the West consisted of poorly maintained roadways, few waterways that were readily accessible to rural farmers, and even fewer mountain railroads. This made agricultural markets in the West virtually inaccessible, thus creating a subsistence farming culture that provided little income for farmers. However, in the East, river transportation was the leading means of trade via steamboats, along with a well-developed railroad system that linked the East with other major markets. This produced a prosperous staple crop economy of tobacco and cotton that thrived upon the use of slavery. These economic differences grew into political ones as the wealthy Eastern Virginians maintained more authority and representation in government than the West. This disgruntled many Westerners because their government failed to adopt to the post-Revolutionary War immigration into the mountains in the late 18th century. The population growth made their representation in the state legislature smaller in proportion to the East under Virginia's state constitution. Its legislature called for the equal representation of 2 members from each county. This system worked well at first, but as Thomas Jefferson noted, its very capital defects began to show as the highly dense mountain counties had a smaller per capita representation than the many smaller populated East counties. This was largely the result of Virginia's Constitution being the first instituted in the United States before any Americans had experience in perfecting the science of government. To correct this, the Westerners met at Staunton, Virginia in 1816 to discuss their grievances against the government. They sought a change in representation and the abolishment of the governor's aristocratic Privy Council. They felt this council had an Eastern inclination when choosing the sheriffs and justices of the peace for each county. The Western leaders also fought for suffrage for all white male taxpayers. It was common practice in the East for voters to hold land in more than one county, which entitled them to vote several times in one election. Western farmers were incapable of voting in this way due to their poor economy and lack of capital to buy widespread estates. However, they succeeded in establishing a fund for improvements on Western roads, but it proved totally insufficient. This angered Westerners since the government spent much money improving the Roanoke, James, and Potomac rivers for transporting Eastern goods to market. In 1818, a committee of the General Assembly suggested moving Virginia's capital west of the Blue Ridge Mountains. This appeared to be a positive for the West, But the reasons for such a move revolved around Eastern politics. They were attempting to avoid any slave uprisings in the East and to protect themselves from foreign ambitions. The move was not voted on for over 30 years, and when it was, it failed to pass Virginia's Senate. The Westerners didn't meet again until 1828, when a constitutional convention convened to modify the state constitution. They once again sought suffrage for white male landowners, but instead the West actually lost delegates in the legislature. They also wanted to shift the power of voting for the governor from the Eastern-based legislature to a popular vote. This too was denied, but the Mountaineers did succeed in reducing the membership in the governor's influential and partisan Privy Council. The question of keeping slavery was also brought up in 1828, when Nat Turner's slave rebellion in eastern Virginia resulted in the deaths of 61 whites, mostly women and children. It emphasized the need for abolishing slavery because of the actions it provoked, such as this. The farmers also saw slavery as an economic downfall for the West. The eastern plantation owners had lower operating costs and produced more products that were available for sale at many markets. Then, on October 16, 1859, John Brown and his followers captured one of Virginia's most strategic crossroads at Harper's Ferry, and a major storehouse of United States government arms. This illustrated the buildup of tensions between abolitionists of the West and the pro-slavery plantations of the East. Their opinions were clearly expressed by Mountaineer Thomas Marshall, who said,
"Slavery is ruinous to the whites. It retards improvements, roots out an industrial population, banishes the yeomanry from the country, and deprives the spinner, the weaver, the smith, the shoemaker, and the carpenter of employment and support."
These outrages prompted Western leaders to post general orders calling for military support from the farmers to resist the Confederate forces of the East. They not only sought men to fight, but also attempted to commandeer all public stores, horses, wagons, and property for their effort. They were now at a point in which they were ready to fight for what they believed. Their complaints reached a peak in April of 1861, when the Richmond Convention voted for Virginia's secession from the Union. Soon afterward, the North secured the stretch of the B&O Railroad in northern Virginia and secured a fortified position on the Potomac River for war. Instead of volunteering for Virginia's army, the Westerners took this opportunity to become associated with the North. Western delegate John S. Carlisle called the Clarksburg Convention soon after to denounce the secession and call for a division of Virginia. In the Second Wheeling Convention in June of 1861, the delegates, led by Francis Pierpont, organized to defeat ratification of a Virginian secession and proposed a restored Virginia government to be located in Wheeling. This established a township government with widespread use of popular sovereignty and a private ballot to encourage more voting. The new Wheeling legislature passed a dismemberment ordinance in October 1861. At the Wheeling Convention in November of 1861, the Constitution of West Virginia was written and approved. It was later declared a new state by the Lincoln administration on June 20, 1863. West Virginia's separation from the South was of critical importance to the North in the Civil War. The borders chosen for West Virginia were strategically placed to include a stretch of the B&O Railroad to the west of Maryland. Union forces blockaded this important southern supply line soon after the start of the Civil War. The Union was also aided by the influx of mountaineers who joined the army for war. West Virginia's support was of great help to the Union cause. Virginia's history has been hampered by a lack of cohesion. The Westerners experienced sectionalism, being situated between the nation's northern industrial heartland and the distinctive economic and cultural regions of the Appalachian Mountains. Virginia's economic divisions spurred from the quality and accessibility of land that inhabitants struggled to settle and the eastern bias against mountaineers who were almost always poor. The Western Virginians combated this with a strident form of state patriotism that led them to form their union with the North.